say hi to you, because you mentioned you.
We're going to go ahead and get started. Yeah, all right. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Amber Mace. I'm the Executive Director of the California Council on Science and Technology, and this is one of the fourth of a series of briefings on wildfires, and we're grateful for you to join us today. A little bit about the California Council on Science and Technology, or CCST. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit. We were created at the request of the legislature over 30 years ago to help bring in expertise to inform decision makers, and we do that through the help of our partner institutions. And we have formal partnerships with the University of California, the California State University System, Stanford, Caltech. We have 4 Department of Energy labs, including Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, Lawrence Livermore, Sandia, and SLAC, or Stanford Linear Accelerator, and 2 NASA labs, NASA Ames and NASA JPL. And so, as you can hear, we have an incredible resource of expertise in California, and our goal is to really connect that expertise and make sure that the people who are making decisions here in Sacramento have easy access. And one way to do that is to host these briefings where we can highlight a particular topic of interest that might be brought to us by decision makers or by our experts. So if you have ideas of briefings you want to hear about, do let us know. We also have a fellowship program where we bring scientists into the legislature and now the executive branch. If you have been or are a science fellow, raise your hand. I know we have some in the, oh yeah, nice, that's great. So that's a wonderful program that we're thrilled to keep perpetuating. And today we have what is, again, the 4th in a series on wildfires. Our earlier briefings were on technology use once a fire has started, health impacts of fires, and then our most recent briefing was on forest management practices. And this is an obvious and useful follow-on to that, talking about the products that are produced during those forest management practices. So I'm really pleased to be able to introduce our expert panel here today, and I'll do that by turning it over to our moderator, Evan Johnson, who is with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. He has a background in this. He has worked on climate adaptation and mitigation in many ways and has quite a bit of expertise. And so we're thrilled to have him moderate this panel for us, and he'll do the introductions, provide more detail about what the panel is, and turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves. I also want to acknowledge and thank Senator Daly and his staff for helping co-sponsor this briefing with us. So with that, I will turn it over to Evan to take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Amber. Can you hear me? Thank you, Amber, and thank you to CCST for the continued work in this arena in the wildfire space. It's been great to see this set of panels you guys have put on, and I'm proud to be part of this one. I'm looking forward to hearing from our great panelists here. I'm just here to set the stage a little bit, and just for a little piece of reference, Angie and I actually co-chaired a group on the tree mortality task force that was looking at how to use woody biomass, some of the excess woody biomass that was coming from the tree mortality problem we have in the state. And so this has been a problem that we've been thinking a lot about for the past 5 years or more, and it's near and dear to my heart, so I'm happy to be part of this. Just want to say by way of framing that we're in arguably the worst set of wildfire seasons in California's history. 2018 saw, I think it was around 1.8 million acres burned, 19,000 homes, many of which were in the town of Paradise and the Camp Fire. $12 billion of insured losses from the year. So really facing a catastrophe, particularly looking at the wildfires of 2017, 2018, that needs to be addressed and is being addressed all around the state. Forestry experts have recommended that we need to increase the pace and scale of forest management in the state of California, either through prescribed fire or technical thinning. But what that means ultimately is that we are going to have a lot of excess biomass potentially coming off the landscape. And the natural place for that to get managed is to get burned in situ if there's no other place for it. And so we're here, we brought 4 experts into the room to talk a little bit about what are the alternatives to that in situ burning? What markets exist for these? What technologies exist to take that what is traditionally a low value woody biomass? We're not talking about timber and lumber grade here, but we're talking about low value biomass, and how can it be used in a useful way here in California. So I think with that, I will let the panelists introduce themselves, and I'll start with Angie Lewis over here. Angie, will you start it off? And give, if everybody will give just a couple of minutes on so your perspective a little bit on what we're going to talk about today, and then we can move to questions.
Great, thank you, Evan. Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving us your time this afternoon. As Evan mentioned, my name is Angie Lewis. I'm an Assistant Deputy Director for Climate and Energy at the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. My program is in the resource management side of the department, and we represent the department in conversations at the state level about climate change, about bioenergy and wood products, and also, of course, for the thanks to the legislature, a fairly well-funded forest health grant program. So we are responsible to administer that program. That is what most of my staff spend their time on. The Forest Health Grant Program is focused on increasing the pace and scale of forest restoration and conservation at the landscape level, which is, I think, beginning to become a widely known to be a malleable term. But for those applications that we grant funding to, we really do look at what is the role of the forest ecosystem across a large area, and sometimes at the region level, what are the things that it provides and what are the ways that we can transform or manipulate the carbon on the landscape to perform those ecosystem services better and to keep the forest in the state of a forest for the next 50 to 100 years. We, as Evan mentioned before, taking this position at CAL FIRE, I did work with the Watershed Research and Training Center, which is based out of Hayfork in Trinity County, as a co-chair to the Biomass Utilization Working Group and also to the Bioenergy Working Group on the Tree Mortality Task Force, where we worked on issues such as the high hazard zone and how to incentivize use of material that was destroyed as a result of pests, not of wildfire, but of disease and insects and other pests, to a state of utilization. Before that, I was at Humboldt State University. I did my master's degree on a biomass energy life cycle assessment, so I've been thinking about forests since my undergrad in 2005 and carbon in forests in California for about the last 8 years. So I'm just so pleased to be here on what is a fantastic panel. It's really nice to see familiar faces in the crowd, and hopefully we can continue great work together, and thanks for having me.
Hi everybody, my name is Kevin Fingerman. Thanks CCST for having me here for what I am sure will be an interesting conversation. I am an associate professor at Humboldt State, all the way up north. Come visit us, it's beautiful up there. My work is primarily on life cycle assessment, so looking at the sort of all-in, cradle-to-grave impact of a process or a product, and in particular we have a big project that's been funded by the Energy Commission's EPIC program, looking at the life cycle greenhouse gas and criteria pollutant emissions associated with bioelectricity from forest residuals, and that's what brings me here today. That work has been an interesting process. We're sort of year 2 of a 3-year project and are starting to get some results. If you're interested in the nitty-gritty of that, come talk to me afterwards, because this is not the time and place for discussion of LCA methods, although I probably would talk your ear off about it. Part of that project is mapping the residuals from various different treatment types that could be applied to California's forested landscapes. And then another big piece of this, and the thing that I think is sort of most relevant here, is that the big lever on what drives the life cycle emission intensity of forest residue mobilization is what would have happened to those residues if they hadn't been mobilized. And we know that there's some combination of prescribed burn being applied, decay over time as they sit there on the forest floor, and that decay could be quicker or slower depending on the circumstances, and also wildfire on a sort of knowable probability basis. We never know where a fire is going to occur, but we know the probability of that fire in any given year. And so quantifying that and mapping that spatial heterogeneity in the state, I think, is an important piece of understanding what the impacts from a criteria pollutant standpoint and from a greenhouse gas emissions standpoint really look like. So that's a big piece of what we've been doing, and I hope that policy going forward is going to be able to manage or sort of apply that nuance and recognize the very significant heterogeneity in these systems across California's forested landscapes.
Hello everyone, my name is Indrala Mukhopadhyay, and thank you for CCST for inviting basic science scientists to this panel. I'm a senior scientist at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. I am part of a bioenergy research center called the Joint BioEnergy Institute. We are one of 4 such institutes that are federally funded across the country. JBay has had $25 million a year for the last 12 years to basically develop the science and technology around fully converting plant-based biomass into bioproducts and biofuels. And we have spent an incredible amount of time trying to figure out how we convert biomass that looks like this is switchgrass, or biomass that looks like this is pine or poplar. What are the conversion processes that maximally use this biomass and convert it to downstream value-added bioproducts and biofuels? I brought some handouts for people. You can grab them from me later on about what JBay does and so on, and I'll be happy to pass these around too. They're completely benign. You walk on it every day when you go for your nature hike, as I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. And so I guess my perspective in this matter is, in the face of this very imminent and very, very large challenge, the immediate sort of action has to be mitigating this challenge. And there are some incredibly powerful technologies that are being used right now and that are being developed by members of this panel itself to mitigate the problem. But there's also an opportunity. The opportunity is in using this biomass to make something that adds value to this whole process and opens up the solution space into something that can long-term feed back into the system and provide energy, fuel, and money to resolve this problem and become part of the long-term portfolio of solutions. Because as with any other solution for such a large multidimensional problem, no one solution works perfectly in every space. So you need those options. So from my perspective, what are the technologies that can convert this biomass on site, in situ, into liquid, gas, or other materials that have longer term storage potential or use potentials? That's one module of the problem. And the next is, how do we couple the downstream biotech opportunities to this biomass? Currently, most of the biotech in California, and believe me, California is so rich for this biotech, goes either out of the state to use more tractable biomass or goes straight out of the country to do their scale-ups elsewhere. How can we leverage those same biotech solutions to bring profit and value to the biomass that is a problem in California? So those are the questions that I hope you will ask me, and I will get an opportunity to answer. Yes, and my background, I'm trained as a chemist, but I've done microbiology for the last 17 years, and I've always been at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, right from the get-go. So that's me.
Well, hi everyone, and thank you for coming this afternoon, and thank you to CCST for organizing. My name is George Peridas. I'm with the Lawrence Livermore National Lab. I have been at the lab for less than a year. I joined in March. My background is mechanical engineering and environmental policy. Prior to joining, I was at NRDC, the environmental NGO, and my remit there was climate and energy policy federally and in the in the States, mostly in California. The mission that I've been given at the lab is to put together the necessary partnerships, whoever those may include, in order to make large emission reduction projects take place, materialize in the state of California and hopefully beyond. As you know full well, the state has very ambitious climate goals. The previous governor left us with an executive order that calls for economy-wide carbon neutrality by 2045. SB 100 calls for 100% zero carbon electricity by then. These are very ambitious targets, and you all probably know about SB 32 and all the other related programs that come into those policies. So we really do have somewhat of a moon landing ahead of us, a carbon moon landing, and we are in the middle of taking a close look at what the state can do to make sure that it maximizes its chances of meeting those goals, those ambitious goals. So we've been fortunate enough to get a grant from a foundation to do a comprehensive study on how the state could achieve so-called negative emissions. So there are many things, many practices, many technologies that the state has championed, renewables, efficiency, just to mention a couple, and the efforts on those need to be redoubled. However, we think that the state will need to go further and dig deeper, no pun intended, in order to meet its mid-century climate goals. So this is where negative emissions come in. We're talking about a family of technological pathways or solutions that can actually remove CO2 from the atmosphere on a net basis. And these could be purely technological, or they could be biogenic. And this is where forest biomass comes in. We are looking at the entire universe of feedstocks and technological pathways that could result in negative emissions. And one of the sort of big three feedstocks is biomass, woody biomass that is sourced from California's forests. Combined with the climate problem that we also have a wildfire problem, as you are all acutely aware of. So we believe that there is a unique synergy at this point where the state could both dramatically reduce the severity and likelihood of wildfires, and at the same time achieve negative emissions. So I'm at your disposal to talk about those technologies and our preliminary findings.
Great, thanks. And I'm sure there are 100 questions in the room, but moderator's prerogative, I get the first one. And I kind of want to play off of something that Andrea said, which is, there are a bunch of different feedstocks. She held them up in her hand. We're pretty unique here in California that we have low-value woody biomass that we're looking at addressing. It's a homogeneous material, and it's in various places. I was wondering if you each would bring a little bit of perspective to what are the challenges to that particular feedstock that we're looking to address here in California. And maybe, Andrea, since you inspired the question, if you don't mind kicking it off.
Yes, so it is both the challenge and the opportunity that depending upon the specific area you are in and the plant biomass you're looking at, the kind of tree, your biomass will be very different. It will be oily, it will be aromatic, it will have other residues from soil and other materials in that environment. So the first challenge is to be able to deconstruct this material to homogenize it for the purposes of direct use or subsequent use. And there are some very, very scalable in situ applications that I think Angie can shed more light on. There's also an opportunity to take both gasified, liquefied, or pre-treated material, which just means milling and, for the lack of a good scientific term, cooking, the material to make it into pellets, and then use downstream processes to convert it. Now, I guess from a science point of view, there's two things to keep in mind. One is any plant material generically is about 2/3 sugar and 1/3 lignin. And so 2/3 sugar we can convert very, 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 very. That 1/3 lignin is what gives us more of a challenge. And there's a lot of work at JBay and in all our partners. We have partners at Santa Barbara, San Diego, Davis, Cal, Livermore, Sandia, as well as us. There are various modules of this program focusing on how to fully convert this plant material into downstream value-added products, which feeds into the life cycle analysis and the techno-economic analysis of the process. Is it viable or not? So I think the one thing I will say pointedly as an answer to this problem is that the reason I can even sit here and talk about the scalability of some of these processes is for two reasons. Through federal funding, we have a process development unit that allows us to take real-life biomass and implement our processes on them to see where the pinch points are and where we are failing. So we can go back to the lab and develop more technologies around it. This is the ABPDU funded by the Department of Energy that enables us to do it. But it kind of generically solves problem at a nationwide level. It would be really fantastic to have some California support for specific problems that will ail biomass from California, such as low-value woods with more impurities in it. What will it take? Those are special problems, and we would love to have some support to be able to do that work specifically. The second reason I can say that this thing works is because of process development units like the ABPDU, we were able to demonstrate some of our basic science technology to the level that they were adopted by California companies like Ametis that have been able to scale up their processes using our technologies that can handle very mixed ag woody biomass from California in their processes. So some of this technology can then already see the light of the day and become immediate solutions. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I spoke a lot.
That was perfect. And Kevin, it'd be great for you to weigh in a little bit, because I know you've been looking at the life cycle side of this.
Yeah, and there are lots of life cycle questions associated with this, but I think that the primary challenges sit more in the realm of economics and business development than they do in the realm of emissions, although I think that emissions are a piece of the puzzle and that any subsidy or policy to promote mobilization of these residues should take environmental performance into account. But talking to folks in this industry, which I've been doing over the last couple of years a great deal, two things come up regularly. One is cost of mobilization. We're seeing $30 as much as $60 a ton in cost to mobilize this material from the woods and bring it to wherever it's going to be made use of. And that is a pretty significant cost for what is otherwise a very low value product, so much so that it's currently being left to decay or burning in the woods. And then there's the fact that any plant that's going to do significant investment, especially, I mean, even at the scale of a industrial scale wood chip plant, let alone at the scale of a industrial bioproducts or biomaterials plant, needs to see a consistent long-term contract and availability of feedstock. And if we're going around chasing the next beetle kill incident, those beetle kill trees 3 to 5 years after they're dead, standing in the woods, they're not being cut down soon enough, and if they are cut down, they're sort of no longer useful. And even if it's about fire hazard, you can't necessarily sign a 10 or 20 year offtake agreement with a forester, because that resource, unless it is very carefully managed with the intent of its residues being used in this facility, they just don't have that possibility. The one place that the state has turned, as we probably most of us know, is to power markets through the Biomat and BioRam programs through the Public Utilities Commission. And this is in large part because power markets are a convenient lever. We have regulated utilities in a way that we don't have regulated biomaterials industries. And we can tell them what to do even if the market wouldn't do it on its own. and they are maybe more able to offer a longer term contract because of the nature of power markets and power purchase agreements and because of the nature of the feed-in tariff structure that they're selling into. But I think that those two issues, the cost of residue mobilization and the reliability of sourcing and the ability or the inability to secure long-term sourcing contracts, makes it really hard for this industry I'm speaking of it as though it were a behemoth. I mean, we're talking about a suite of different things that could make use of this material if the environment were right, and I mean the business environment, these two factors make it really challenging to do so.
Angie or George, do you guys have anything to add to that? Or?
I think at the risk of spending, of not allowing you to move on to the next question, I might just add that I think there is a perspective that CAL FIRE has here through the grant program and the contractors that we work with and the landowners that we're trying to help with this issue of how do they make their property safe and protect their forests, and do something about the material that is generated on the back end. The spatial issue has come up a few times, and I think maybe I can just add a lens that it's not just about what it takes to move a piece of equipment out there, find a person who knows how to operate that equipment, then both convert the biomass from a kind of lengthy top of a tree into some kind of chip that's handleable, and then move that chip back to Berkeley, or of course they're mostly going to Reading or something else like that, but a significant distance out of the woods. There also is there's a distance between the people who are working on these issues, right? So the people who are out in the field thinking about what equipment do I have available, what are the things that need to be done in this season, so there's a time component to it. They're not necessarily a part of this conversation yet, which is to hear, which is the conversion technology that leaves most of the lignin on the ground or something like that, or the particles of the tree that are full of lignin. I mean, we sort of know how to leave leaves there, so that helps with it. But I would just say that I think there's a lot of space to be made in spending time on this conversation, right? You don't just solve the problem overnight, and this is an amazing first step, and it's really great to be a part of it, but I think there's more work to be done on that as well.
Can I make one comment?
Sure.
So I wanted to make a couple of comments because both Kevin and Angie made such critical points that I feel are part of this puzzle. So one part of the puzzle is how, if you want to incentivize biotech industry to use this material, you need to have a reliable long-term source of this. So I feel like, yes, you cannot chase disasters for your carbon source. It's great if extra material is available because of some emergency, but that's not how it would work. You would actually have to tee off of your preventative measures, which are more routine, regular, and so there has to be perhaps some thought and rules, policies, I suppose, in place that couples preventative measures with generation of biomass, with technologies that can convert it into either something that can be converted on the spot and generate a circular economy to pay for that, or be able to be transferred a particular distance without that distance sort of making it a wash. There's no point transferring it that distance. It's now more expensive to do that than to make the product. So I think within this challenge there lies some solutions, but then there has to be, because initially setting up that infrastructure is expensive, there needs to be some policy push to do it. Otherwise they don't get rolling. So I really like the thought that you need this reliable source of carbon source, and I think it's there. It just needs to be treated as such. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And I promise I will open up for your questions in just a moment. But George, I wanted to put something to you, just thinking about the context of this conversation and our climate goals. Would you be willing to talk just for a couple minutes about, how does it tie in with our climate goals? Thinking about this wooded biomass problem that we have as an opportunity. Can you talk a little bit about your perspective on that?
Absolutely. So I think that leads well to the counter question. That we heard some of the logistical and economic challenges, which to me points towards some kind of public-private partnership in order to overcome. The opportunity is the enormous amount of carbon that is contained in that biomass and the co-benefit of reducing wildfire severity and likelihood. So if we manage to find an infrastructure system that moves our carbon away from the problem areas and then takes it away from the carbon cycle, then we've scored a big victory. And we estimate that the whole family of negative emission solutions can give us 100 to 150 million tons of CO2 equivalent net negative per year. And I'm going to take a rough stab. I would say that maybe a quarter of that, or thereabouts, can come from the efforts that CAL FIRE and the U.S. Forest Service are planning to do of treating about 1 million years, 1 million acres a year of land that's prone to that fire. So there are many things that you can do with that biomass if you get it to the right places and the right form. You could turn it into long-lived construction materials and timber products. You can turn it into a gaseous fuel like hydrogen or renewable natural gas. You can turn it into a liquid transportation fuel. You can generate electricity with it. There are many, many possible pathways, and this is not a lab rat's dream. I'm talking about technologies that are from mid to high level of maturity today, and we've been very careful to look only at companies that are serious, that exist today, are on the verge of making it, or have already demonstrated their applications and their projects. So by doing so, you remove an enormous amount of carbon from the atmosphere. This will need some infrastructure. We're probably going to need pipelines, not probably, definitely going to need pipelines, and we're going to need some trucking. There will need to be a coordinated look at how you site that infrastructure. The other co-benefit that I see is that we're probably all familiar with the old generation of biomass plants that have been burning agricultural and natural residues with pretty distinct impacts to local air quality. We think that this new generation of technologies that we're looking at would avoid that. So we wouldn't be generating particulates and NOx in the way that the plants of old have done. We're talking about a new generation of plants, and we estimate that we're going to need about 25 to 50 of them distributed around the state that will be able to turn that biomass into things that we can use or things that take carbon away from the atmosphere.
Thank you all. I appreciate that. I will take a minute here to open it up for questions. I could talk all day, and I'd get these guys to talk all day, but I think it would be really valuable to have you guys have questions. So I see one hand up. I should have asked this ahead of time. Should we have people up to the mic, or?
If you just want to repeat the question,
Okay.
but have people introduce themselves.
Okay, great. Yeah, so if you can speak loud enough to ask a question, then introduce yourself in the process, that'd be great. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kelly Boyd with the California Low-Carbon Fuel and Energy Coalition. We've been working in this space for a lot of years, and one of the solutions we've been working on with rural counties, private foresters, and now the rural counties have a master agreement with the U.S. Forest Service, is to do a combination of technologies, biochar, which is scalable and portable, can actually be moved into the forest, do soil treatment and or generate electricity, combine that with natural gas vehicles for the stuff that you do have to move out, but it can, the biochar technology that's in place today, that's being used mostly on farms, can use slag, it can use tips, it can use small diameter trees in addition to pelletize, so it's good for where there's and it can use charred material. So we're looking at solutions like that where we've looked at life cycle as well and try to minimize carbon along the whole pathway. But while we're working on a public-private partnership and looking to do this sort of broadly, we haven't been able to successfully interface. We work in the Forest Management Task Force, we work in these, but to make sure we're also tied into your studies at the university, because we're generating data. We've done a lot of life cycle analysis that we would love to share and get feedback on, but also show you how these solutions are working today. And again, they're economically, really feasible at this point because I think there's 7 or 10 facilities already operating in California. But use them with other technologies and then leverage the existing biomass facilities that are contracting for large volumes to sort of get a sustainable solution. So we're just looking for, your thoughts on that, and then also, whether and how we can help provide additional information and data to help inform thinking.
If you don't mind. Kelly, this is Kelly Boyd, and she was talking, I'm just going to reframe the question, or restate the question for the microphones here. Talking a little bit about sort of biochar as a process for a solution here, and some of the networks and partnerships that have been developed to support that. And I kind of want to turn that into a little bit of a question to say, how, what are the partnerships that are necessary, and how do we get the information and data sharing that we need? What's the infrastructure, the partnership infrastructure that might be necessary or might already exist to help support these processes? And sorry, Kevin, I don't know if that's the direction you were heading, or George, if you want to add whatever.
Well, thanks for being here, and please feel free to come chat afterwards if you want to follow up about the work that we're continuing to do. As far as partnerships, I think that conversations like this one and follow-on conversations with folks in the room are really useful. Things like the Biomass Working Group and those sorts of efforts that get relevant people. I've been impressed with the sort of breadth of stakeholders that you folks have in the room for those meetings, everybody from Caltrans to industry folks to nonprofits who are working in this space, and absolutely this sort of integrated campus that is capable of using the variety of different materials in a variety of different ways that are appropriate, or the sort of cascading usage of material as appropriate to different applications. I think that sort of thing makes a lot of sense. I just want to bring it back to the fact that from a climate and an air quality standpoint, there's a great deal of variation. We're showing like an order of magnitude variation across the state of California in what are the impacts associated not with the use of these materials, because those systems are somewhat similar to one another, or one particle board manufacturing facility is not all that different from another one. One biochar, there's variation in the life cycle of the manufactured product as well, but in the life cycle of what happens to that material, you can imagine a circumstance in which you have material that is otherwise going to be pile burned definitely. And if you take that material and you put it in a durable wood product, or even in a modern thermoelectric power facility or a gasification facility, you're going to reduce criteria pollutants by several orders of magnitude versus an open pile burn, and you're going to reduce climate forcing because of avoided methane and things of that nature also somewhat significantly. On the flip side, if you have material that is going to be scattered in a landscape where decay happens quite slowly, and where there's a low likelihood of wildfire in the immediately foreseeable future, then the sort of net effect of mobilizing that material looks quite different. And so that's the kind of thing that our research is trying to help shed some light on, and I want to encourage those of you in the room with policy making power to take that into account in shaping those policies, because it is not uniform. Like the impact of mobilizing these residues varies a great deal across the state.
Yeah, go ahead.
So quickly, so we can move on to even more questions. I think this is a big logistical challenge. How do you take lots and lots of trees that are located in steep slopes in remote areas and then do something different with them than just letting them rot in place or burning? So I think that the state could help in that big logistical challenge if it were to undertake transporting, for example, this biomass to the fence line of private companies that are looking to project finance facilities that will then convert that biomass into fuels or other products. We will also need other kinds of infrastructure. We're going to need pipelines, the state, if it were to determine that this is a priority in terms of both fire prevention but also climate goals, then it could look into making more efficient the permitting pathway for some of these things to actually materialize, as opposed to saying, okay, we have an objective here that cuts across many agencies and many processes, and we have that goal, but we don't know how it's going to work in practice.
I think I can just add a little bit to that, is that through some of the grant programs that CAL FIRE has, we have started to tiptoe into the world of paying for the transport of biomass. In those places where there's fuel reduction that's going on, and we don't necessarily want there to be pile burns, or sometimes it doesn't make sense for there to be pile burns in terms of the amount of time the project has, and to support some of the systems that have been set up through the Tree Mortality and the Forest Management Task Force. But those have pretty significant limitations. You know, the program is only allowed to give money out for sort of 3 years at a time. So in the terms of helping people invest in trucks or other equipment, there are just a ton of limitations on that. So in case any of you are wondering, aren't we doing that? We are, just a little bit. And it's fairly expensive and is not a primary goal. So we are learning some lessons, but are not really having, I would say, that big of an impact on the transport market with the funds that we are spending on that.
So are there any other questions in the audience here? Please feel free to raise your hands. Yeah?
Dave Michelle, California Energy Commission. So I'm hearing that looks like there's a considerable amount of infrastructure that has to be built to accommodate some of these end uses. So have there been analysis on the separation of different kinds of the end products that's coming out of this million acre per year of forest products, and understanding where you're collecting it and where it needs to go, and what kind of facilities you're considering at that point? And the other question I have is, when you're transporting these systems, are they end use ready, or are they have to have further processing?
Thank you. This is Dave Mitchell, is that right?
Michelle.
Dave Michelle at the California Energy Commission. Thanks for the question. It boils down to two pieces. One is there are a lot of infrastructure needs, and has there been an analysis done, or is there a need for analysis on what that infrastructure is and what those needs are, and sort of the flow of material to get where it needs to go. And the second was a question on further processing when it gets to that end goal. Does anybody want to start on that?
I can maybe just take the first half, which is that we do, there are people whose job it is to know what the market is in California, and so I would say it's not a black hole. There's probably not a website, woodproducts.com in California or something like that. It's a little more, and then, so there are we have to find the right folks to put you in touch with that. Some of the people in this room probably could do 99% of that, rattling off that list. But then also I would say, out of the Tree Mortality Task Force, there was a bit of an analysis on where things were sort of already going. And so there are 1 or 2 documents that we could point you to. Of course, where it's going now is not sort of the thing that we're all interested in as much as where it could go. And so that's actually where most of my expertise drops off a little bit. So if anyone wants to take the second half.
George?
Sure. So if you hold on for about a month and a half, our report will come out and sketch out some of these things. If you're taking the biomass, gasifying it, and producing, then converting it into renewable natural gas, obviously if you're close to a gas pipeline, job done. If you're producing the hydrogen, then you have probably come across the discussion on expanding the state's hydrogen infrastructure. We don't think that this is something prohibitive, but it's something that needs to happen. You could also gasify the biomass and produce electricity, in which case all you need is a connection to the grid, and then a means of transporting the CO2 in a supercritical state to safely dispose of it. So we're going to sketch out the options. What still remains to be done is an infrastructure study that will try and map out how many of these plants do we need, where do we put them. So if we are sourcing dead trees or any other kind of thinnings, slash from either commercial operations or from Sequoia, Kings Canyon. How do we get it to the right place? What is the right place to get it to anyway, to begin with? And how do we go about realizing this network of facilities and transport networks that will allow this carbon to be removed from the atmosphere on a large scale? And that, to my knowledge, has not been looked at. This is a new concept and a new idea, and we have yet to do that.
I can add a comment. Oh, go.
Yeah, please do. Go ahead.
Did you want to make a point?
I was just going to add on, but I can wait.
Okay. So I was going to jump into the second part of the question.
Please do.
So the first part is about where to do the processing. And that's important because of all of the various aspects we discussed right now. And regarding that, there are both technologies in place that are mature enough to be deployed, and there is certainly also a lot of discussion around developing mobile units that can be deployed in a scalable manner. That won't be a silver bullet by any means, but will be a very substantial part of the solution. And what part of the problem that resolves is to take this very diverse biomass and convert it to something simpler for downstream use, directly or indirectly. But really what I wanted to comment upon is that second part, what is being made from that biomass. So the California Energy Commission, in fact, funded us. JBay, when we got funded this couple of years ago, they provided a sort of assistance to us to take the mature technologies from JBay and demonstrate that they could be scaled up. So our partnership with EMEDIS is a California Energy Commission funded objective where we took the mature technologies to convert woody biomass to demonstrate that they could in fact be converted to downstream materials that can be used in a biological platform to make what you want. In this particular case, it's ethanol. But in theory, we could demonstrate this process for a large number of downstream compounds. Now, as George pointed out, there isn't existing capabilities for this already. If this is a route we think is reasonable and we want to go, then there needs to be support for this kind of demonstration to show that you can make these kind of downstream products, and you have to weigh the life cycle and the techno-economics of the process to say at which point do we break even, which aspects of it need to be subsidized by the government. But the science is there. And it is even being demonstrated with CEC support. And so if that is an important piece of this puzzle, then some more investment would go a long way.
And I think, is it okay if I just add on to back to the first part? About I mentioned that we sort of know where material is going in terms of market analysis or market assessment of wood products, but we don't really know where it's coming from. The landscape is so diverse in terms of ownership, management objectives, the licensed timber operators and other equipment operators that they employ who are producing the material that then is shipped out, the haulers. First of all, they are not really a wirelessly connected community, so it's not like we're just automatically tracking where things are going. There's, in some cases, paperwork that you can follow, but for the most part, if a venture capitalist, as I think we experienced earlier this year, who is interested particularly in biofuel production, who has reached their limit in agricultural supply material from the valley, says, hey, 100 miles upstream, I hear there are 179 million dead trees. Who do I talk to about getting that material, or where is it coming from? There's no comprehensive data set to say, what's been done even in terms of work, because we know sort of how many trees are out there in the CDC and I think out of UC Davis, and quite a few academic organizations have looked at sort of what's the full picture and what's potentially technically available using assumptions and spatial data and things like that, but we don't have a record of how much material really has been sold off of different parcels, which is important when you're looking at a business framework.
Thank you. Questions from the audience? I see a few hands. I'll start over here on the right, if you don't mind.
Krista Warner with Senator Nielsen's office. In addition to infrastructure, what is the projected workforce needed, and do we currently have enough trained individuals to fill those needs?
So the question was from Crystal Warner, is that right?
Krista Warner.
Crystal Warner. And the question is really one of workforce and workforce development. Do we have the people we need in the state to do this? And if not, what needs to happen? I would add to that, what needs to happen to get us there? And are we taking steps in that direction already, I would add.
So the answer to that is, if you're talking about having a workforce that is looking at protection of 1 million acres a year, then no, we don't. I would say, from my experience and my perspective, I think that's actually one of the easier questions to solve. There are workforce training programs that are being set up. Shasta College has just, I believe, submitted a certificate to the state university system so that they can graduate students with a certificate in logging. I guess I want to say, I'm not sure what the noun there would be, but so that they can do logging things. And I say logging here, but I should be, apologies, I should be more cognizant. I do mean forest management, and really there is so much sort of non-logging work that goes right alongside with that. So that's a learning lesson for me. But in addition to that, I'm not sure how plugged into the world you guys are, but there are a tremendous amount of folks being laid off in BC right now. This season is not going well for them, and they are looking for work. So I think that we know how to do these things for the most part. There may be some skill sharpening or some equipment design that needs to go into moving carbon from a thin, sort of weedy tree into a feedstock that can be used for something else. But we know how to do it, and people need jobs. And we are doing all of this with a lens of rural economic development on it. So with that, I think.
Just to sort of piggyback on that, I agree with Angie that this is a manageable problem. People need jobs, and people particularly need jobs in the places that are hardest hit by forest, ecological degradation, wildfire, etc. I mean, we're talking about rural regions of the state where unemployment is very significantly greater than that in urban parts of the state, and many of those regions have had pretty significant declines in employment rates because of reduction in conventional logging. Humboldt County, where I live, is a prime example of this. Humboldt State has the biggest forestry school in the state, and many of those foresters are ending up going elsewhere because there's been a pretty significant contraction in harvest in the region for good reasons to do with ecological conservation, but there's plenty of trained workforce, or could easily be plenty of trained workforce. There's plenty of people in need of work, and it's trainable skill sets. So it doesn't seem to me like that is a real significant barrier to this.
I had a question, a follow-up question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Krista, I wanted to see if you would clarify. Were you talking about immediate workforce, or were you talking about perhaps a whole new industry that could be educated around this, or both?
I suppose kind of both. Currently, because it's an idea that we've been tossing around, looking for legislation or support for those kinds of fields. Serving a rural community, we are looking for things that are going to boost the local economy, and as you had touched on, giving them employment and opportunities, and that's why we've looked at ideas of biomass facilities locally, keeping the resources are local, you're boosting the economy, it all kind of is self-contained and serves multiple purposes. So curiosity as to what we have now, where do we need to be, looking future forward, and how that impact would be, or do we need to train more, what kind of training do we offer, do we need to invest more in those trainings, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. And I think we have time for one more question, a lightning round maybe? So,
Maybe last comments.
yeah, and so here's what, can I do a quick question and then build into that last comments? I'm getting approval from the boss over here. So one more question from the audience and we'll try and wrap up last comments into that. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Jonathan Kusel, Sierra Institute for Community and Environment. Thank you all for doing the panel. Important, timely, and really important kinds of materials. I want to follow up really on what the last questioner just asked, but push it a little bit further. A couple of the comments have talked about scale, and Angie, thank you for mentioning rural development. And Kevin, you mentioned also at the very beginning the business challenge as well as the technology challenge. How do we more effectively think community scale, discuss community scale, and should we, given the opportunity and as was identified the at times desperate need of a lot of these rural areas for economic development, business development, and work that can really make a difference? And just one quick follow-up. Unemployment rates are higher, but the people who just entirely left the workforce are way higher. And for good reason, because the opportunities haven't been there. So should we be having, and if so, how, a different conversation to talk about community scale investment?
Thanks, and just to recap, it's Jonathan Kusel at Sierra Institute, and he was asking, how do we think about this and any of these solutions at a community scale? Is that a scale we can think about with these solutions, and how do we work that into the framework of some of these technologies that we've been talking about today? So if you guys don't mind, each giving around 30 seconds on that, and we can also use it as an opportunity to wrap up. That'd be great, and we can start with Angie. That's okay?
Oh, yes. I'm just over here daydreaming about all the ideas that have been stimulated in this one, so thank you. So absolutely, I think we need to be looking at community scale. One of the interesting things that I think in the world of forest management and biomass energy that has been going on pretty much since the 90s, there can be communities that are not bought into this work. And so just out of that, saying, we need to be doing everything we can to bring communities along with us and working with them and understanding what it is they need and want. And that's a whole other thing that is added on to, what are the different species that are across spatial regions and how will fire interact in those places. On top of all of those things, you need to add in, and what is the community interested in? Because this is something that we are going to be doing beyond the rest of my career. We not only do we have we have 100 years of different forest management to sort of switch out of. And then we have to figure out what worked and what didn't work in face of the new climate that we're in. And then we need to work on maintenance. And so we need to look at solutions that are going to last for a century, and that means having the communities as a part of it. That's how you're going to get through economic ups and downs, and when the grant money dries up and all of those other things, the community will keep those things running if they help the community meet their goals. So absolutely. I also think that we cannot do this on grant funding alone. Small businesses have a huge part to play in economic engines, but I also think that accessing private equity will get us to pace and scale much more quickly than if we, say no profits ever, and let's do it all, on taxpayers. So there's a place for both.
Angie, thank you for that. And also, I want to add that you're a bad judge of time, so it's not 30 seconds. But it was a great answer. We do need to wrap up, so I just want to keep it short if we can.
Okay,
Thanks,
I will make every effort, but I do want to pitch an idea that I've not seen. I think we need to recognize, and I want to front load that I think biopower probably plays an important role in a sort of pushing towards 100% renewable energy landscape. But we also need to recognize that we are currently subsidizing biopower pretty significantly here in California in the form of feed-in tariff programs. back of the envelope conservative estimate is about $100 a ton of residue removed, and it's probably north of that. What if we had a mechanism whereby we were putting that subsidy, which is maybe not to be called a subsidy because it's coming from ratepayers instead of from state coffers, but it's still being paid for by the state of California, the citizens of the state of California. Well, what if we were to open the door to non-power market uses of that residue and say there's $100 a ton on the table, or it's a auction mechanism like the Biomass, and we say, hey, anybody who can come in and use X number of thousands of tons a year through building a facility is going to get a check for $100 a ton or whatever the auction lands at for residues, and you'd have to build in social considerations to get at what Jonathan is alluding to, environmental and air quality considerations. There's no reason that we have to pick a winner in this. We could create a subsidy mechanism to promote residue utilization that's targeted on certain landscapes and that is open to any type of user or a set of types of users for that residue. I think I also went over my 30 seconds, but I just wanted to put that out there in case it triggers any ideas in anyone else.
Okay, thanks. Andrea?
Everything these guys said. It's fantastic. Angie, yes, you hit every point out there. This is a very long-term problem. So I'll just add one thing. If you're dreaming, let's just dream like super big, right? Why not? So I think the solution, some of the best innovations will come out of this environment from the people of this environment because they're facing it every day. So why should they not reap the profit of it? If there are opportunities, if there are ways to form startup companies, do an internal iteration of public-private interactions, as you pointed out, then this community should benefit for it. For that, they have to have the right credentials and education for it. And I think every local university should gear towards a program that educates people not just for the immediate requirements of forest management, but also long-term biotech use, LCA modeling, TCA modeling, the whole scope of the work. The expertise needs to be here. There is no reason to think why that should not be part of the curriculum, why the education should address a challenge that is immediate and also long-term in this environment.
Thanks, George.
So I'll end on a climate angle. I think the quicker that we all agree that there is no silver bullet solution and that we should stop fighting each other and debating, what is the best thing to deploy and realize that we will all need each other. I think that the quicker we're going to get to the higher we're going to, our chances are going to be actually achieving those goals. Now the woody biomass question brings in a whole other co-benefit here, which is the prevention of wildfires and reduction of severity that have plagued us in no unclear way, especially in recent years. So I remain hopeful that the combination of those two factors, the climate urgency and the wildfire severity, will lead to a solution. I think that the challenges that we face are substantial, but they're not unsolvable. And we have done harder things in the past, and the conversation is pretty much brand new. So yes, we're sitting here feeling somewhat daunted, but these are things that if we chip away at them long enough and we're motivated enough, we can actually achieve. So
Great.
I'm optimistic.
Great, thank you very much. And I want to thank the panelists here, Angie Lewis, Kevin Fingerman, Andrea Mukhopadhyay. Did I do that right?
Yes.
Excellent. And George Pervas for being part of the panel here. And I'll hand it over to Amber.
Yeah, thank you, Evan. And again, thanks to the panelists. Thanks to all of you who were able to join. Good news, we have lunches for everyone, even if you didn't RSVP. I also want to thank Senator Daly again and our CCST staff. And there are many of them helped with this, in particular, Teresa Feo, who led this effort. So thanks again to our panelists and everyone here.